On today's show, a breakdown of Hawks Pelicans from College Park on Saturday afternoon. We'll get into all of what transpired and more coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1566 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Saturday evening here in mid-October. And today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Right now, if you're a new customer, bet $5 and get $200 off in bet and bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And I also want to tell you at the top of the podcast and really encourage you to make us your first listen each and every day. Please subscribe to the podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, places like Apple, or Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or Overcast on the audio side. And we're also over at YouTube on the video side if you want to watch the podcast in that form. And today's podcast will focus on what became a 110-105 win for the Hawks on a Saturday afternoon in College Park. We'll have more on that in a second, but I was in the building for that one. And the Hawks are now 3-0, a trio of closely contested fourth quarters, but the Hawks escaped all three of them with victories. And this is the final game in the state of Georgia for the Hawks for almost 2 weeks. In fact, they will not be back until next Friday for the actual home opener. The final two games of the preseason run are on the road. So a nice little barrage of 3 games in 5 days at home, including an afternoon game today. But all positives for the most part. Obviously, some things to nitpick and some injury stuff and all that stuff. But in general, a very strong start to the preseason run for Atlanta, and that includes the game this afternoon. The Hawks look good, especially when they played their guys. They were up by as many as, I believe, 28 points in the second half of this game before it got down pretty tight at the end. Lots and lots of highlight plays and flash plays from guys like Jalen Johnson and Okongwu and Trae, et cetera, et cetera. They played very good defensively in the half court, I thought, in this game in particular. Some transition stuff, as you might expect in the preseason, and a lot of turnovers. But when they were actually back and settled, they played well despite being without some key guys. And then I would just say, as always, the sloppiness of the preseason always happens. At one point, the numbers were pretty stark in terms of how ugly things were at times in this contest. But the Hawks did. They were the better team when the actual guys that matter were playing, for the most part, is the way I'll put that for now on the podcast. And lots to be excited about. With all that said, we'll go back to the beginning now. For one, I got a lot of questions about why the Hawks were playing at Gateway Center down in College Park. The big reason is that the Hawks agreed to a home-and-home with New Orleans before last season. Last year, I was at this game. They played a preseason game at the Pelicans G League Arena in Birmingham, where there is not an NBA team, obviously. This is sort of the return trip to play in the Hawks facility in the G League. But beyond that, Quin Snyder has experience in the G League. He actually coached there at one point. He's a big believer in the G League process, and he opened up his press conference actually before the game today with sort of a statement, unprompted, about the importance and his excitement of playing College Park. So here's what Quin had to say about the opportunity to play in College Park.
Well, before we start, this is my first time, in this building. It's really great that we're having a chance to play here. I think having coached in what at that point was the D League. This program is really important to what we're trying to do with the Hawks. And, you can tell the logistics, the facility, how organized the whole group is. They're operating on a high level. And I even partook in a hot dog. So I can speak to the concession stand as well. I haven't done that in a while, and it was a high-level hot dog. I was joking with Ray about I haven't sampled hot dogs too many places, but this was one of the best. So I'm saying that somewhat facetiously, but again, the operations, the facility, the people, and obviously with Ryan Schmidt, our coach here in College Park, and his staff and some of our players that are going to be spending some time here. Just think this is a really important part of our program, and it's great to have a chance to be here and to play here and have everybody feel it and understand that we're connected in the most important ways.
All right, and from there, some player availability stuff at the top of the podcast. Obviously, we'll talk about the guys who did play in a second, but this was the third game in 5 days. It was also an afternoon contest for the Hawks after a night game on Thursday. No travel, but still, not a full rest period between games. Also, they play again on Monday on the road in Indiana. That'll be the 4th game in 7 days, which isn't crazy, but in the preseason, that's a pretty hectic schedule. So we already kind of knew, at least I strongly suspected, that some guys were going to be sitting out in this game. And basically, we asked Quin Snyder pregame who was going to be available, who wasn't, et cetera. And this is what he had to say about that. What's sort of the context around it?
Sadiq, Hunt, and Clint will be out. As I said before, those guys are, you walk by and they're all working and lifting. And just given the fact that it's preseason, as I said, we're just going to be smart about everything from bumps and bruises and fatigue and those things. So we'll be looking at that, every game. And as I said before, also, this is a little bit unique as far as our schedule goes, is, the amount of games we're playing in a shorter period of time. So puts even more focus on that in my mind and in our health performance team's mind.
Later on in the press conference, I actually asked a follow-up about whether there was any concern whatsoever about DeAndre Hunter or Sadiq Bey, because they both have missed multiple games. Now, Hunter's not played at all, and Bey has now missed the last 2 games, although there's no injury that's been described for Bey. Of course, I talked about this a lot with Hunter previously, but here's what I had to say about that follow-up question. You'll actually hear my question and his answer coming up right now.
Is there any concern with either DeAndre or Sadiq not being ready for the opener at this point, or is it just caution precaution?
How long before our opener?
25th. Week and a half.
So 10 days?
Still got 10 days.
Okay, I think we're all right. Is my hope, there's all, you're always aware of those things, but we've got time to prepare, and, we'll always look at everything from scrimmages to off days to things like that, which we've been doing.
Of course, not the straightest of answers here from Quin Snyder. That's actually what he's basically been doing the last couple of weeks. I did feel, though, it was necessary to ask about this because Bey has, again, missed 2 games in a row. Hunter's been out for all 3 games. I did discuss, if you missed it, Hunter's injury stuff in more detail on the Thursday night show. It's a bone bruise in his right knee. He's had some knee issues in the past. The Hawks are all saying the right things in terms of it not being an issue, but he's not played at all in the whole run. So that's at least noteworthy. And with Bey, we don't really know what's going on there. Quinn's said the bumps and bruises thing a couple times, but we don't know any specifics beyond that. But anyway, that's the background there. And by the way, while we're here, I also wrote something on my Patreon, patreon.com/BTRowland, about the duo that I really want to see on the court, not necessarily just for like it being the best combination, but just for information purposes. I really wanted to see, and hopefully might still see, Hunter and Jalen Johnson play together, because last year they did not play very much at all. And that is, I know a lot of Hawks fans in particular want Jalen to start at power forward, and I have no issue with that whatsoever. But one of the questions, there's been a lot of focus, even from me and others, about the center spot with Jalen playing with Clint, which is also not something that they've done a lot of in recent days. But on the other side, Jalen and DeAndre Hunter have not played very much together. And by the way, the results were not good when they did play together last year. So I wrote about that at Patreon. I'll probably have more on that later on, but that was at least something that was top of mind in the midst of, again, another game where Sadiq and Hunter did not play, as well as Capella, who just basically sat this one out because he's very established, doesn't need to play all the time in the exhibition schedule, kind of like Bogey missing the opener along the way. Last thing on the player side, on the pregame side, I should say, the Hawks kind of threw a curveball with the starting lineup, which we don't know and can't ask about ahead of time, but essentially they started Okongwu and Bruno Fernando together rather than starting Jalen Johnson at the 4 as he did on Thursday. The Hawks always list their lineups guard, forward, center, and Okongwu was listed as the forward in that lineup, which obviously makes sense with Bruno Fernando. If you're just tuning into this now and kind of maybe new to the Hawks, Okongwu has basically never played power forward in his career. It's always been a popular topic of conversation because of his size or lack thereof for the center spot. I know there are people that are still thinking he's a 4 naturally. He is not, and he has always said he's not, and so have the Hawks. So that's not really the competition now. It's basically, can they use him at the 4 some if they want to? I will say he and Capella have played a couple times in very special situations at the end of games or on defense in one possession times, but basically never in the flow of the game has he played any kind of 4 in a meaningful contest. And it also is a little bit easier to play Okongwu with Bruno because Bruno's a little bit more offensively versatile than Capella is. Still interesting, though, that they try to do that here. The other thing, though, about this is sort of context dependent. I know it's preseason, but they were playing the Pelicans, And the Pelicans are pretty interesting in how they match up. So for one, Valanciunas has kind of owned Okongwu in the past. That might sound strange. I know it probably does, but he's just huge. He's given Okongwu some fits. Also, Zion Williamson is kind of their pseudo point guard in some respects. And the way it broke down was they had Okongwu on Zion, which makes a lot of sense. But if that's your primary matchup, you need somebody, to guard Valanciunas and also just have somebody behind him at the rim. So I'm pretty sure that's why they did that in a lot of different ways. It didn't last that long. They kind of did it a couple times. But anyway, Quin said post-game, the Okongwu with the 4 was something they've at least talked about. He did go out of his way and acknowledge this, by the way, that he kind of did not want to be pinned down on anything there with regard to how we actually do that normally. I do think this is me talking now. I would be pretty stunned if they started Okongwu at the 4. But I do think, and I've said this before on the show in the last couple of weeks, like I would like to see him and Clint be tried in a situation at some point in time. We'll see if they actually try that. It would help a little bit that Okongwu's been taking some more threes. He's still not going to get guarded just yet as a three-point shooter, but I think that's always been the question. Defensively, I think it almost certainly would work. Okongwu is so versatile defensively and so good defensively, plus Clint's a fantastic anchor at the back. It's really about the offense. And if you're going to do it, the lineup to do it with would actually be the starters that the Hawks play tonight with Trae and Dejounte and Bogey at the 3. Because that way you have your 3 best offensive perimeter players that kind of offsets maybe the clunkiness on offense, all that stuff. Okongwu said also, he was asked about this after the game by Lauren Williams. He talks about the 4 not being his natural position, which I certainly agree with. He said he can do it, and I agree with that. So we'll see if that means anything. By the way, in the second half, they came back out with Jalen at the 4. So it was not like they were married to that. They tried it for a few minutes, and it was more interesting than anything else. But Snyder's been very open about how they're pretty much experimenting in the exhibition schedule. Like, notably, they've not kind of made a decision of any kind about the power forward spot. I think that's probably pretty clear at this point that, like, Bay versus Johnson's still up in the air. They haven't had DeAndre Hunter. They sat Bogey. They sat Clint, et cetera, et cetera. Wes Matthews didn't play on Thursday. He played tonight. Line of combinations. They're closing games with, like, the third unit with no backup center. All that stuff. It is definitely preseason for everyone, is what I will say on all that front. But in general, before we move on to the actual game flow in this one, the offense was not fantastic in this game. They were much better when the guys were actually playing. But even then, even when the starters were playing, it was more flashes than efficiency. They didn't shoot the ball well at all from three-point range. They did shoot 72% on two-point attempts in this game. But defensively, the Hawks, on the whole in this one, were really good, especially in the half court. Transition stuff was pretty ugly at times, especially early on. They did force 15 steals. That's a ton of steals for this Hawks team. It's not always been very aggressive, but as we talked about a little bit on Tuesday and Thursday this week on post-game shows, this is a defensive approach that's much more aggressive in general so far. Again, it's still very early, but they're seemingly going to be probably mortgaging a little bit of their three-point defense as far as like attempts and volume is concerned, in exchange for creating some more havoc at the point of attack, using their length, all that stuff. They have Capella further around on the court. They have Okongwu out there, Jalen out there, causing havoc, and that's maybe what they're going to do a little bit more of this year under Quin Snyder. Okay, with all that out of the way, we'll have a break here from our sponsors today's podcast. When we come back, we'll have full-on game flow analysis as well as some player evaluation at the end of the podcast. But first, a word from our friends at FanDuel. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Step into the action this NFL or NBA season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, if you're a new customer, bet $5, get $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed and beyond the awesome perks of signing up with FanDuel. They have everything you're looking for in the sports betting space. They have point spreads and over-unders and money lines and player props and future bets and much more. Live betting, it's all there for you at FanDuel. The app is safe and secure. They cover the entire range of sports as well. Beyond the NBA, which of course they are covering, as we talk about on this podcast all the time, they have the NFL, college football, MLB, WNBA, college basketball, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, and many more. They have Hawk stuff on there, from preseason stuff like futures and division bets and over-unders. They have player props, and of course you can get lines on preseason games as well as the regular season opener, which is coming up pretty soon out in Charlotte. And now is the best possible time. Sign up and join FanDuel and all the fun over there right now today. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Check out the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network with an offer that you will not want to miss. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, we'll dive in now to the game flow in this one. At the outset, it was, again, Trae Young, Bogdanovich, Dejounte Murray, Okongwu, and Fernando in the starting lineup. They actually had Bogey guarding Brandon Ingram out of the gate with Dejounte Murray on Herb Jones. I will say, I was a little bit surprised by that, but at the same time, it's not a great matchup for really anybody out there on the perimeter against Brandon Ingram, who's so long. And Bogey is, for all of his weaknesses as a lateral mover defensively, he's pretty strong and pretty heady. So he's actually done a pretty good job on some big wings in the past. I will say also, as a reference kind of earlier, Okongwu is pretty well suited to defend Zion in a lot of ways. He's always been good on Giannis, who's kind of similar to Zion, not body type wise, but more like physicality wise. Anyway, they're playing two bigs. That's kind of the best path to contain Zion in general. They did allow some shooters to have some open shots. And I will say the Pelicans are really bad at offense in this game, but the Hawks were probably responsible for that. Dejounte had a nice steal and finish in the early going around Valanciunas. Okongwu actually had another early corner three. He shot it immediately and confidently. He took one by the break later on in the game. He's been very eager with that. The starting lineup lasted about 5 minutes. They went back to Bruno on the bench with Jalen out there, and they had pretty quickly a trademark Jalen Onyeka lob play for a dunk. Those guys are playing very well together, as they always do. Great chemistry with that pairing, and they're also friends off the court, which probably helps things. The pace was very high in general in this game, even faster when Bruno came out of the game. They went a little bit smaller. Dejounte was really active defensively, creating havoc like he has done in the past. That's the one area where he actually was pretty good last year defensively, was creating havoc, and they'll have more of that in the future. But I will say the end-to-end transition defense was pretty rough early. A couple of clear breakdowns led to layups and dunks. Quit a couple timeouts that were not great. Like he didn't really seem very happy about that. In fact, Okongwu, this is actually in the third quarter, Okongwu said post-game that Quin called a time, or called timeout or took him out of the game, and put it right back in the game because of defense. He basically said that he got called out for not getting back on defense, which is obviously some messaging stuff there. But for a starting level guy to have that happen to him in the second half of a preseason game, Quin's not fooling around at this point in time. Hilariously, Dejounte had 4 steals and 4 turnovers in the first 9 minutes. It's hard to have 4 turnovers in 9 minutes. It's almost impossible to have 4 steals in 9 minutes. He had both. That's pretty crazy. AJ came in as the first perimeter sub, had a nice steal actually on the left wing. They went back to Wes Matthews for Bogey as the kind of the 8th man in the first half. Also, today is Wes Matthews' 37th birthday, so shouts to Wes Matthews. It was a pretty awesome ATO play where the ball was really flying around for the Hawks. It actually ended up with an easy bucket, some really crisp passing, and nobody stopping a hold on the ball. A lot of good ball movement moments in the first couple of games here. And then again, defensively, pretty sound in the half court. They were pretty connected. Obviously, having a lot to deal with Zion, but I thought Trae was engaged early on. That was nice to see. Wes Matthews was really good with his minutes as well, and they held the Pelicans down quite a bit. In the second quarter, the Hawks actually went on an 8-1 run, went up by 14 points, and they actually made 12 of their first 14 inside the arc in this game. The Pelicans just could not score. They were scoring less than 0.7 points per possession in the first 15 minutes. That's hideous. And this is their starters. This is Zion. This is Brandon Ingram. This is CJ McCollum, etc. The Pels did throw a lot of size at Trae defensively between Herb Jones and Dyson Daniels, and Najee Marshall actually got hurt in this game, unfortunately. Trae also got teed up at one point for arguing a non-call after he made a shot. I think he was right about the argument, but still, it's kind of funny. Preseason game, etc. But the Hawks went very short rotationally in this game in the first half, I should say. They only played 8 guys in the first 15 minutes or so. Bucket was the 9th guy when he came in. I actually asked Quin about that. He basically confirmed like what you would think about trying to get as they go further and further into the preseason, they want to have like more of an idea. They want, for instance, after halftime, they stayed with Trae and Dejounte for a couple minutes, just kind of simulating more of that, have those guys go into the locker room, come back out, and they actually had a big run early in the third quarter. So ramping up in terms of seriousness that they're taking this stuff. Of course, the last quarter and a half was pretty much garbage time, but alas. Trae drew a charge on Valanciunas right in front of where the media was sitting, and the bench was going nuts with excitement. That was funny. Trae was fired up. Wes Matthews took one too. There were actually a lot of charges taken in this game. But as far as the preseason stuff is concerned, there were 25 turnovers combined in the first 16 minutes of the game. That is disgusting basketball. That's just for some pace considerations there. That would have been, if they stayed on that pace, and they slowed down after that, but if they stayed on that pace, that would have been a combined 75 turnovers in a 48-minute game, which is, on the rough average there, 37.5 per team per game. Both teams too. It wasn't just the Hawks, it was the Pelicans. The Hawks were making more shots than the Pelicans were, so they were still winning, but it was pretty rough ball security wise. They had a Okongwu guarding Zion again later in the half, etc. Fast forward, and the Hawks were up by 18 points at halftime. They were up by as many as 20 in the second quarter, despite the 32 combined turnovers at halftime. 15 for the Hawks. The two teams combined to shoot 6 of 38 from 3, including 3 of 21 from the Hawks. So the Hawks had 15 turnovers and they were 3 of 21 from 3 in the first half, and they were up by 18 points. They scored less than a point per possession in the first half, and they were up by 18 points. Those numbers are impossible, basically, or always close to it. On the positive side, the Hawks did shoot 79% from 2, and they had 38 points in the paint, and they had 11 steals in the first half. That's how you get all that. Pelicans just couldn't score, and the Hawks were comfortably up at that point. They had 4 guys with at least 9 points in the first half. Trae had 13. Jalen Johnson had 7 assists in the first half. He was really excellent. Come back to him later on in the podcast. After halftime, obviously a little bit less to get into. The first few minutes were the starters. As I referenced before, this is kind of the first time that any of those guys have stayed in the game beyond halftime. They had a big run to open things up, and it was Jalen Johnson in there instead of Bruno. They scored 16 points in the first 3 minutes to go up by 28. That was capped off by a no-look pass to Trae to a streaking Jalen Johnson for a dunk. Okongwu had a windmill dunk. Yes, a windmill dunk from Okongwu in that run. I actually asked to follow up the question that Lauren Williams asked him about that dunk after the game. And he said, basically, I asked him whether he would actually try that in a game that mattered. And he kind of laughed and said no, but maybe if he was feeling really good. It was just one of those funny moments. But he really sort of loaded up on that one. It's nice to see from Okongwu. He's pretty explosive. Obviously not quite on Jalen Johnson's level, but certainly a pretty good athlete in his own right. Trae and Dejounte came out of the game after that. That was all we saw of them, as it probably should have been. Bogey kept playing for a little while longer, but not too much more. The Pelicans did come alive. In fact, they had a 14-3 run immediately when Trae and Dejounte left the game to get back in somewhat touch. The Hawks finally started emptying the bench a little bit with Mo Gay coming in mid-quarter. That was kind of the end of Okongwu's day, and for the most part, that was kind of the extended garbage time. Not that guys like Mo Gay, I'm not saying those guys are never going to ever play ever, but they're obviously not in the rotation opening night. The Hawks were up by 18 at that point, and from there it was kind of all New Orleans. The Pelicans shot better, etc. The fourth quarter was, again, I'm not trying to write it off, but it was kind of garbage-tastic. It was Trent Forrest out there again, and Garrison Matthews, and Seth Lundy, etc. Everyone who was active in the game appeared in the fourth quarter. They closed with a very, very small lineup of Trent Forrest, Kobe Buffkin, Garrison Matthews, Seth Lundy at the 4, and Mohamed Gay at the 5. So that's pretty funny. They blew the lead all the way down to 6 with 3 minutes to go, and then it was actually a 5-point game at the very, very end of it. A couple of nice dagger plays from Gay and Lundy at the very end. Lundy hit a big 3, and then had a pretty sweeping rebound that kind of capped the possession defensively, and his dagger with a minute to go kind of ended the game. But anyway, there's plenty to talk about from this contest, but the last quarter and a half was kind of extended garbage time, as you might expect. No word yet on whether the Hawks will take Monday or even Friday next week, which is the finale in Philadelphia, to have a more of a dress rehearsal game. Sometimes teams will have their guys play closer to their regular minutes in one game. The Hawks did have guys playing a little bit more today, as I said before, but nothing still Trae played 18, Bogey 23, Murray 21, Okongwu 25. That's a little bit closer, but not quite all the way there yet. So we'll see on that. And also the Hawks have kind of a quirky schedule now. They had this super busy week, and then they go Monday to Indiana, but then after that, they have one game, and it's that Friday game in Philadelphia over 8 days. So that's a little bit they can have another mini camp in there, basically. And then we'll talk about more on that in the future regardless. But, big picture, as far as the sum up of that, the Hawks played pretty well, especially defensively for the first 2.5 quarters. Hung up for dear life at the end, but they're 3-0. And I'm sure everybody's probably had a little bit more fun than that, even if the game's results don't necessarily matter a ton at this juncture. All right, we'll dive into the player stuff now, and plenty of positives to touch on here. We'll start with the bench. I'm not going to go through the entire thing, because Miles Morris played 4 minutes. Not a ton to discuss there. Patty Mills, 8 minutes, didn't score in those 8 minutes. Seth Lundy hit 2 big shots and actually had 8 points in 6 minutes, but not a ton there either. Trent Forrest, steady hand, 3 assists in 12 minutes. Garrison Matthews hit 2 threes. Took 5 free throws in 12 minutes. Positive sign. Mohamed Gay was much better today, I thought, than he had been at times in the first 2 games. 10 points, 2 rebounds in 13 minutes. Made all 4 of his shots from the floor. Wes Matthews was Wes Matthews in a lot of ways. Had 4 rebounds, had 2 assists, good defense, had a block shot. Offensively, not a ton there, but he'll do his job. Kobe Buffkin, not super efficient. 4 points on 9 attempts in 20 minutes, 2 assists. Defensively, I thought he was pretty well dialed in. He's playing a lot right now, which makes sense. I still don't really have a great feel for how the Hawks would handle it if they had a half or game or a week without Trae and Dejounte. They've been playing Buffkin, which makes sense, kind of rotation level minutes because he's a first round pick, but I don't know if that's going to be the same. Like you don't need to play Patty Mills right now in October. So it's a question we may not ever know the answer to, but there you go on all that. Who else did I touch on at this point in time? AJ Griffin had a rough shooting game. 1 of 9 from the floor, 0 of 7 from 3 points. Did have 4 steals, which is actually nice to see from AJ. 5 rebounds. I got a question. I can't remember who now, so my apologies on that. I didn't write it down. But somebody asked me in the middle of the game if I was worried at all about AJ's shooting. The answer to that is definitely no. Maybe I'm wrong, but AJ, if there's anything about AJ's game, really anything that I don't worry about, it's his shooting and his touch. He's not shot the ball well at all, but that's not something I'm worried about. He's been a high-level shooter at every level. College shot the heck out of it. Last year had like truly elite efficiency by rookie standards. His jumper is still there. It looks the same to me, so I'm not worried about that at all. Just some bad results early on. But I will say, out of the rotation guys, like the guys who are going to play minutes this year, he's probably been the one who's struggled the most in the first 3 games. Do I care about that? Not a ton. It would have been better, if he played better, but I'm not worried at this juncture, and I'll leave it there for now. To the top 6 in this game, Jalen Johnson came off the bench. This one was plus 17 in 17 minutes. He looked fantastic. I mean, I'm not even sure what else to add. 12 points, 7 assists, 2 steals, 3 rebounds, 2 turnovers, but that was kind of it. 5 of 9 from the floor, 1 of 2 from 3. He looks fantastic. I mean, I don't want to go overboard. I said this during the game. I think there's a little bit of a tendency locally, like Hawks fans and maybe even media at times, to be a little bit carried away with young guys in general. This is the way that it is for every fan. I'm not picking on the Hawks fans because young guys who flash, in particular, who have great flashes like Jalen, who has he's prone to having awesome flashes, the hype cycle gets a little bit out of control. Like I know most of them are said in jest, but like the comparisons to guys who are like established stars are a little bit aggressive. But on the other side, this is the key part. I think Jalen Johnson is like very much way too off the radar nationally. I think Jalen Johnson, as a former top 10 high school prospect who had a rough year at Duke, obviously, but I love the pick in the draft and said as much on this podcast numerous times, in part because he slipped so far and the upside was very clear. Like, I'm not saying he's going to do this, but Jalen Johnson had top 5 upside in that draft. I believe that genuinely. So the tools are there. He's flashing them. He looks fantastic. Again, I want to plug it one more time. I wrote about the basically the pairing between him and Hunter and how that impacts things. I talked about Jalen's overall game, but he looks comfortable. The first game on Tuesday, he looked a little bit shaky offensively, trying to figure out where he was going to be. But ever since then, he's basically, the last 2 games, he's been really, really dialed in, more aggressive, letting it fly as a shooter. The passing has always really been there. It's really one of his more intriguing traits, and I love passing, so I'm definitely all in on that. He threw some great passes in this game. The length, the burst, being there courtside in College Park, it all pops. And I think that hopefully people are going to start taking notice of this. Do I know for sure he'll start opening night? No, I don't. But I think he's going to play plenty. He's going to be really good, and I'm really excited. I think Hawks fans are obviously very excited, as they should be at this point. He looks great right now. Nothing else to add on that front. To the starters quickly, Dejounte Murray, 21 minutes, 12 points, 4 steals, 7 rebounds, did have 4 turnovers, but that was actually all in the first 8 minutes. He slowed down after that. He was efficient. Defensively, he was aggressive and opportunistic. Obviously, Dejounte's defense last year was not my favorite, but he was focused in this game and making things happen with his hands. Bogey had 9 points in 23 minutes, 7 rebounds as well, 3 assists, 3 steals. Again, 15 steals for the Hawks in this game. 3 guys with 3 or more, plus 2 more for Jalen in a short sample size. Bogey looked good. He's moving well. Knock on wood. He's very important to what they do. Bruno Fernando had a kind of a rough stretch in the second half at one point. Had 9 points, 6 rebounds, had 4 turnovers in the game. A little bit shaky, but I think he looked fine on the whole. Just had one bad 3-minute period. I think Okongwu looked great. 18 points to lead all scorers for the Hawks. 6 rebounds, 2 assists. Had the windmill dunk. Was very efficient around the rim. Took 3 threes. I love that. Just let him fly, big man. Go ahead and do that. And then Trae Young, of course, was really good when he played. 15 points, I should say, in 18 minutes. 5 assists. Defensively was at least scrappy. Didn't shoot great from 3, 1 of 5, but was 5 of 6 on 2s and plus 18 in his 18 minutes. So basically, when the Hawks had their guys playing, Trae, Dejounte, Bogey, Okongwu, and Jalen, all 5 of those guys had at least a plus 12 plus minus in this game, which isn't everything in a single game, but they certainly were good when they were actually playing their guys in this contest. And I'll leave it there for now. Before we get out of here, one piece of small news: the Hawks signed and waived David Singleton over the weekend. He played summer league for the Hawks, if you might remember that. Guard from UCLA. Didn't really impress too much in Vegas, but another guy who the Hawks can sort of send to College Park and the organization likes. And then last thing here, again, looking ahead briefly, the first road game of this season is on Monday. Fourth game in 7 days, 7 o'clock Eastern time. So keep that in mind, an earlier start than usual for the folks in Atlanta. It is my understanding, in fact, I was told this directly, that the local people in Atlanta, like myself, can watch the game on Bally Sports Southeast. I don't think it's going to be the actual like huge full-on coverage Hawks broadcast. I believe they're taking the Pacers feed. Also, Indiana is a Bally station, so they're sharing the feed there. The game will be on Bally Sports Southeast. I was told that today. And then after that, the Hawks have 3 days off. They're actually going to come home in between, so they're going to Indiana. They're going to fly home after that. They'll be in Atlanta until Thursday, and then fly to Philadelphia for the preseason finale next Friday. I guess this Friday, less than a week from now. And then the Hawks will be in action a week and a half away. You heard that from Quin Snyder earlier in my audio that I played you guys. But yeah, they open up a week from Wednesday in Charlotte. I'll be in that one. I'll be at that game as well. And we're getting closer and closer. And really, again, I don't care they're 3-0 that much, but the Hawks do look pretty good. I think on the whole, if you ask me to take stock of how I feel now versus how I felt a few days ago, certainly it would be neutral or better. I think better. Obviously, caveats apply if there is actually an injury concern for Hunter or Bay. I don't think Capella has anything over just rest today, but we'll have more on that in the future. And again, no injury reports, all that stuff. We're kind of flying blind, and then that all changes when the lights come on next week. But a couple things to monitor as well in the next couple of days. We have an extension deadline coming up. Onyeka and Bay have until, I believe it is next, I'm looking at this calendar now, next Monday is the deadline for extensions. Keep an eye on that. They also have to decide on team options for Jalen and AJ, which are absolute no-brainers, so no really decisions there. But there's some like transactional stuff happening. You got to set your roster. All that stuff's going to be, it's all happening. We're all getting close. So I'm going to stop rambling now on a Saturday evening, but please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you get your podcast. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you for being here, number one. But also, number two, stick around, help us out. Ratings, reviews, telling your friends about the show as well. I mentioned it before, but patreon.com/BTRowland for my written content on the Hawks. Also, you can find this show on Twitter/X at LockedOnHawks. You can find me there as well at BTRowland. Thank you, as always, for listening to the podcast, everybody. I really do appreciate it. And we'll see you all later on in the week.